concept that we have not talked about. Any questions about question number 1? No questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and save it. So this is now saved to the folder that I will upload today to the Moodle website. And let's go ahead and start with the second question.
Is it all going to be based off the same pseudocode?
No. So this is just an exposure. This is just an. I have not decided, what type of question I'll be actually asking, but the format will be like this. So all the questions will have this type of format. Okay.
Now the ones that are in the modules on Moodle main page, those are going to be the blank ones, right? You're not replacing those with the answers.
Say that again, please.
The files on Moodle's main page are the blank questions?
Correct. Yes.
You're not replacing those with your answers?
I'm not replacing those with the answers.
Okay.
Yep.
Just want to make sure. It looks like that's what you just did.
No, I save it to a folder that I will zip up at the end of the day, and then that will be uploaded as a zip file, which usually gets the label of 2010 1027 files. So that one will contain the actual answers that we work on today.
Just like you do with your text files, as like in today's folder on.
Yeah, exactly. So first thing first, save it first. Go to today's folder. So here we have a separate, a different program. This one is something that we should have seen already, but I'm just using it as an example to illustrate what type of question I'll be asking. I don't think we'll have any question without loops. Whether it's a pre-checking or post-checking loop, in order to work with arrays, most of the time you need to have loops. The only time we can kind of avoid using loops is when we use recursion, to kind of do the same thing as a loop. But in this test, since we won't have any subroutines, we have to rely on loops. Yep, go ahead.
There's none of that explaining in sentences stuff on this test, is there?
No, nothing is required. You can add additional explanation next to the trace if you want to, but I do not, use those for scoring, purposes. Yep. Okay, so let's take a quick look at this program. Line 1 initializes a variable m to the value of a bracket 0. Line 2 initializes I to 1. Line 3 is the beginning of a pre-checking loop. As long as I is less than bar a bar, do something. This is a really common type of loop that we do when we are dealing with arrays. Line 4 to line 6 together is a conditional statement. Line 5, which is the action, is only going to happen if and only if a bracket I is greater than m. Okay? And at the end, or before we get to the end of the loop, we add 1 to I, so we can eventually satisfy the required, or at least we will make the condition false eventually, so that we can get out of the loop. Now we look at sheet 2, which is the trace itself. And I think this time I did not forget about variable m, though the line number needs a little more space. And this time the array is smaller. We only have 3 elements this time in the array. The precondition is already pre-set up. I is unknown, m is unknown, but the values of elements in A, they have to be known because there's no code here to initialize or to assign values to the elements in the array. So once again, we start with line 1. A bracket 0 spells out exactly column E. It has a value of 2. We use that to update m. M now has a value of 2. Line 2 initializes I to 1. Okay, so I starts with a value of 1. Now we are on line 3, which is the beginning of the while loop. I is less than bar A bar is true, okay, because 1 is less than 3. Then we go to line 4. Line 4 is asking another condition. A bracket I is greater than M. Is that true or is that false? Well, we have to kind of try to figure out what is I. I is 1. A bracket I refers to A bracket 1. A bracket 1, which is column F, has a value of 1. 1 is greater than M. M has a value of 2, is false. Okay, and that's better because we don't have to trace line 5 when the condition is false. We jump right away to line 7. Line 7 adds 1 to I. I goes from 1 to 2, and that's one iteration. We go back to the beginning of the loop, which is on line 3, and then we ask the question, I is less than bar A bar, and it is still true. Because I has a value of 2, bar A bar is 3, 2 is less than 3 is true. Then we go to line 4 again. A bracket I is greater than M. Is it true or is it false this time? I has a value of 2. A bracket I refers to A bracket 2. A bracket 2 has a value of 4. 4 is greater than M, which has a value of 2, is true. So this is true again. No, this time it is true, last time it was not. And this time we have to go to line 5. Line 5 really doesn't do much except to copy the value of A bracket I to M. A bracket I is A bracket 2. It has a value of 4. 4 is now used to update the value of M. M is now updated to 4. And then we get out of the conditional statement. We go to line 7. Line 7 adds 1 to I. I goes from 2 to 3. We go back to the beginning of the loop, which is on line 3. And it is asking I is less than bar A bar. This time it is false, because 3 is less than 3 is false. And we get out of the pre-checking loop, and we are done. Haven't we seen this loop before, or this type of logic before? This is how we got into arrays initially. Do you guys still remember? We talked about how to find the maximum of 2 variables, how to find the maximum of 3 variables. But when we have 30,000 variables, that approach, spelling out the variables line by one, was no longer feasible. And this is what we first introduced as a solution to that particular problem. Okay. Any questions? Yep.
When you said it was that the last one is false because it's less than 3. 3 is less than 3.
Yeah.
Is that because 3 is equal to or less than?
3 is less than 3 is false because 3 is not less than 3. Okay, when you compare two numbers, the answer can either be true or false. 3 equals to 3 is true. 3 is less than or equal to 3 is true, but 3 is less than 3 is false. A number cannot be less than itself. Okay. All right. So that's basic. That is not a long trace. Okay. If you're tracing this, one thing you might want to do is to bring a little ruler, or a scratch paper. So this way you can just kind of line it up. So it makes it easier to line up the rows. If you have a piece of paper, you just kind of slide it down as you work on the trace. So that might be helpful too. Okay. So we'll.
Is it use a ruler as well?
Yeah. You can use just about anything for this class. The only thing that you cannot do is to use a computer during the exam, or have live communication with somebody else during the exam. Yep. So you guys can bring your calculators if you want to. I don't think there will be any major math in this exam. Nothing more than taking the floor, division, multiplications, and stuff like that. Let's take a look at question number 3. Let me see if I can just cancel this so it doesn't complain. this is our question number 3. I will save the file first to today's folder. And here is the code. The pseudocode is very, very short and very, very simple. And I'm just waiting for that thing to stop. Okay, I think it has stopped right now. Yep. Okay, so if you look at this code here, it's really, really simple. You know, it is deceptively simple to be more precise. The first line initializes I to 2. Okay, for some reason I start with 2, but you know that's the way it is. Line 2 is copying the value of I to a variable called k. And then line 3 to line 5 is a loop. The loop does not do much. It does not increment I either. Okay, our usual thing to do is to increment I in the loop. This one does not increment I. It does do something to I. It takes the value of a bracket I. It uses I as an index first. It accesses an element in the array. Copy the value of that element back into I, and the loop does not get out until I equals to k. Can anyone guess, is this a infinite loop, first of all?
Well, it depends on what the elements are.
Depends on the, aha, very good. Well, do we have to go through at least one iteration in this case? It has to go through at least one iteration because it is a post-checking loop. In other words, you cannot discount and say it will only go through one iteration, because by the time we get to line 5, I would have changed the value of I already. In other words, in one single iteration, there's no guarantee that by the time we get to line 5, I equals to k, even though on line 2, I did make a copy of I into k. Okay, so that means, you know, when you're tracing programs like this, you know, don't make assumptions. Don't look at the code and say, oh, I know what this code is going to do. Just follow the code line by line, and then report to me what it is doing in the trace. And you will find that this is somewhat interesting. This is the trace. We start with line 1. I gets a value of 2. Line 2 copies the value of I to k, so now k also has a value of 2. We don't trace line 3 because line 3 does not really do anything. It is only there as a marker, as a bookmark to mark the beginning of the post-checking loop. So we go to line 4 instead. Line 4 in this case is going to access a bracket I as the right-hand side. I has a value of 2, and a bracket I, or a bracket 2, has a value of 1. I use 1 to update I now becomes 1. Is that okay so far? Okay. Then we go to line 5. Line 5 is the only line that has a condition to check. I equals k obviously is false in this case because I has a value of 1, k has a value of 2. The value of k does not change after line 2. It's always going to be the same. Well, since the until condition is false, what do?
Go back to 4.
We have to go back to line 4. Remember, repeat until means that the condition is an exit condition. When the condition is true, we exit. If the condition is false, we have to go back and do it all over again. We go back to line 4, and this time I has a value of 1. And then we go to a bracket 1. A bracket 1 has a value of 3. We use that to update I. I now has a value of 3. We go back to line 5. Line 5 is comparing I to k again. I is 3, k is 2. I equals k is false. Then we go to line 4 again. Line 4 this time will access a bracket 3. A bracket 3 has a value of 0. We take that value, we copy it to I. I now has a value of 0. We go to line 5 again. I equals k, oops, is once again false. We go back to line 4.